Anyone else want to add, or if not? Okay. And one thing that has sort of an economic angle to it, the critical access hospitals in the state, those are the ones with I think 25 beds or fewer, are really part of the very important network of healthcare for rural Wyoming, and a lot of those hospitals are teetering with financial insecurity and because of uncompensated care. And I guess, and we'll start with Ms. Hutchings this time. Do you have any plans or ideas on how to help these hospitals stay open and preserve this source of health care for rural Wyoming?
That's a good question. And understanding that there are difficulties in those areas, as a legislator, what we can do about it at this moment, I can't give you an answer right now on that one.
Okay, very good. Mr. Wright.
We're going to have to help fund them. I worked as a deputy county attorney in Johnson County, and I can tell you it's a very small hospital. But in the same sense, when you're in a car accident or a hunting accident or some other form, or have a heart attack, that's pretty much the difference between life and death in a lot of these places. The fact that if you don't have these places, you're going to probably see an increase in mortality in Wyoming and a decrease in life expectancy, because there's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to make it to the next town that's an hour or 2 hours away.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Emmerich.
Yes, hospitals are probably one of the greatest economic drivers we have in the state, because a company won't come to a community that they can't have good, competent health care within probably 30, 50 miles. And I think the solution initially that we have to embrace now is Medicaid.
Okay. In addressing the uncompensated care piece. Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that as I guess, as an approach to these hospitals collecting debts and paying their bills? Medicaid expansion. Let's go ahead and explore that for a second.
Well, just briefly, when you talk about exploring ways to help fund them, I've thought of something that's a patient provider personal payment plan, where provider and a patient can come up with their own personal way of paying for Medicaid, medical care, as we did in the past. Having the state and the federal government always come in and help us with funding is not always the way to go. I think we can come up with our own solutions at the local level.
Okay, thank you. Did you want? I know it was sort of a follow-up, but do you want to address that whole piece about paying bills, the uncompensated care piece?
What I've seen over the past, perhaps 5-10 years now, or maybe even longer, is we've punted this issue on healthcare back and forth on the national level, and now it seems to be just a political football. And what I'm concerned is that we keep waiting for the federal government to take an action, and it really may be no action at all. I think that at this point, I think Wyoming needs to start taking a look at, okay, what do we need to do, and how do we get the best health care for the average citizen at the lowest cost?
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add another comment on that? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, go ahead, Ms. Hutchings, if you want.
Yes, if Senator Emmerich is.
No.
Well, in Article 7, Section 20 of our Wyoming Constitution, it says it's the duty of the legislature to protect and promote the health and morality of the people, but not to provide for their health care. I'm not for Medicaid expansion. If that was pretty much one of your questions. So it's so important that we look at other avenues, such as promoting health insurance across state lines, more competition and transparency amongst our physicians in their pricing, healthcare savings accounts, and again, the provider-patient personal payment plans.
Right, thank you. And I guess, since we're kind of in a free form here now, if we exhausted this, or does anyone want to add anything at this point?
I'm good.
Moving on? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. So county officials and the legislature are wrestling with the problem of replacing millions of dollars of outdated voting equipment. Wyoming County clerks have a proposal to use mail-in ballots, much like absentee voting, while maintaining a physical voting location for those who prefer that. They say they can scale up current safeguards to secure the elections, as 22 other states do. Would you support the county clerk's proposal? And we'll start with Mr. Wright this time.
Yes, I think that absentee ballots are a good thing. One of the things I see with the outdated voting equipment, and just throughout the state of Wyoming and a lot of states, it varies from county to county often, which is not technically a bad thing. If you have a lot of redundancies built into the systems where you actually have different voting style equipment in different counties, it's harder to hack, it's harder to manipulate, it's harder to rig an election. And the most important thing of any democracy is protecting the fact that we believe in the election.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Emmerich.
The mail-in ballot situation is kind of up in the air for me. I want to see and hear what Colorado has done. In theory, I'm all for it, but I do want to have voting centers like we do now. But it appears that mail-in ballots in Colorado may very well be pretty effective. And I think if the clerks are for it and they think they can maintain integrity, I'm all for it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hutchings.
I would agree with my opponents on both counts with the mail-in ballots. And I would agree.
All right. Everyone's in agreement.
No problem with them.
Somewhat, anyway. Okay. So will anyone want to add to that? And if not, we'll move on. So Wyoming is facing, and I think one of you made a reference to this maybe now or in the previous forum, is facing a serious and very expensive problem of housing and caring for prison inmates. I know Mr. Wright made a reference to jails, but incarceration of all kinds, it's a very expensive way to house people. Would you support efforts to find alternatives to incarceration and to restore funding for substance abuse treatment, which has at least funding for that while incarcerated has been decreased. So we will start with Mr. Emmerich at this time. So the whole, because we have a expensive, very, very expensive prison we're having to refurbish and maybe replace in a very short amount of time. Alternatives to incarceration, efforts to reduce recidivism.
Our recidivism rate is not very great in Wyoming. We're just getting more clients coming in. I think criminal justice, I think we need an overhaul I think we're putting too many people in prison for marijuana offenses. I think a complete overhaul of our sentencing structure would be very, very good. I also think that we should probably take up an oil company's offer to build a new prison somewhere where it's not on that squishy clay, but on rock.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hutchings.
Another very interesting question that I wonder how much the legislature has a role in participating in the criminal justice system, substance abuse efforts. So I'm not seeing where we have that specific role right now.
Okay, Mr. Wright.
I deal with this every day. I support treatment, alternatives to prison, and normally that's where most people end up. Most people end up on probation or under a deferral, and they're assigned an ASI, and they're supposed to get a treatment, and if they can't control their behaviors and their treatment, then you increase the level of probation, and eventually you increase it to prison with ITU, which means intensive treatment unit, where they're getting their treatment whether they like it or not. The prison is not full of people on marijuana charges. The prison is full of people who cannot make probation and also are violent offenders. That's primarily it. We have about 66 people housed in Mississippi currently. We have almost near capacity in our prison. We spend about $130 a day, I believe, on each one of these people. And what you're seeing is a trickle-down effect. We're full, And the DOC often calls district court judges up and they yell at them for putting people back in prison or sending people to prison. And so the judges are kind of tied, and they keep putting people back on probation that should not be on probation. But that's because the DOC is saying that the prison's full, when at the same time the legislature is cutting treatment. But we don't have bed dates to put people in. And when they can't have treatment, they reoffend. Most of the people that are prosecuted on district court for felonies have a substance abuse problem. They have a substance abuse problem, or they have a mental illness, or they have both.
Okay, thank you. And does anyone want to add anything to that at this point?
I wanted to add something. Ryan is a district attorney here in Wyoming, and so this is an issue that falls under the judicial category. The legislature, I don't see again how we would fall under setting criminal penalties and so on and so forth. But as for reducing maybe funding for programs that would help with drug abuse issues, that seems like that's more, that's out of our realm. Thank you.
Okay. And
I can briefly respond. So the legislature passes what the penalties are, or what makes what a crime is or is not. But the court basically sentences people, but it has to be within the guidelines of what the legislature has set. So for like a delivery of narcotics in the state of Wyoming, it's up to 20 years in prison. Most people don't get that, but that's the maximum sentence they could get. So that's how the distinction's drawn between those.
okay. Anyone want to add anything more at this point? Mr. Emmerich, are you okay? Satisfied with that?
I'm satisfied too.
Okay. All right. So I guess let's go. There's a question from the audience, and it's looking for specific terms. What is your plan to stabilize and to expand Wyoming's economy? What do you propose? So we've talked about it in generalities, and wondering if you have any specific plans you'd like to share with us tonight. And Ms. Hutchings, we'll start with you.
As I stated before, I think the role of the legislature is minimal. The role of government in these issues is minimal, except for trying to create, if possible, a fair and business-friendly environment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wright?
One of the specific plans that I would like is a job training program statewide, and also to put it in prison. One of the things that, or we could get the money for a permanent endowment for such program, is unclaimed property. We have about $79 million in unclaimed property sitting in the state treasury right now. And it's all of our money, or it used to be at some point, but then it was lost along the way, perhaps a check or something that you didn't cash, or somebody who's deceased now. And of that money, about $50 million is over 10 years old. It's been sitting there for over a decade doing nothing but collecting interest. And as a legislature, we could pass a law that says that after a certain amount of time, the money's forfeited, and it goes into a job training program, which could be permanently funded. And that would help also to fund a lot of positions to train people out of high school for a lot of these services. There's a lot of baby boomers that are going to be retiring in the next 5 years in the trades, electricians, plumbers, mechanics, things that we're going to need. But if we don't start training people now, these aren't the sexy and exciting jobs that people want to go for. But if we have a program that offers free job training, we can actually have people ready to fill those spots.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Emmerich, specific ideas about plans to stabilize and expand Wyoming's economy.
Well, I have several. One is a skilled workforce, and I think that we can look to our community colleges that seem to be able to respond very nimbly to provide individuals to fit certain categories within our workforce. And for example, they produce amazing oil field workers in Rock Springs. We do wind turbines at LCCC, and these are people that are skilled, and there's a need for them. Other things that I think that could enhance our revenue, one is federal government now allows us to bet on sports gaming. And I would like to get a piece of that because it's online sports, and we're bantering it about in the legislature with the Joint Appropriations Committee to form a gaming commission to oversee something of this sort.
Okay, very good. Anything to add? Anyone wants to expand on that? Okay.
I believe that the community colleges are extremely important and they're underutilized and they haven't reached their full potential. I agree with Senator Emmerich that we could use those better to expand the economy and to train people.
So along those lines, let me just ask a question that it sort of knocks around the legislature every couple of years, which is that our community college districts tax the people who live within the district, but as we've discussed, they help really, kids come from all around the state to community colleges. Their outreach goes far beyond their district. Should there be a statewide levy to support not just within the district, but expand it to a statewide levy to support community colleges as a source for great workforce training? And I guess let's go ahead and start with Mr. Wright. What is your idea on that?
I think that would be a good idea. Being a former college board of trustee member, one of the things I saw was the inequity within the community college system. You have some colleges that have a lot of money, a lot of resources with financial backing, such as Sheridan College with Whitney Benefits, and a lot of other organizations. And you have other colleges that just don't have that. Their land value is not as great. They're not able to put the money into the community. And the community colleges give right back into these communities. They train the workforces. And they also draw businesses, such as just recently happened up in Sheridan, I think, with Weatherby. What I've heard is one of the main factors was they have a machine program, a machine shop up at Sheridan College, and they train machinists right there, so they have a steady stream of employees that they can draw on.
Okay. So that was a yes, as
Yes.
far as the statewide support. Okay,
Yes.
great. And Mr. Emmerich, what do you feel about a statewide levy, since the benefit seems to be for everyone in the state, not just within the districts?
Yes.
All right. And you can expand on that later if you want. It looks like it's a yes, no.
I think the simple answer was yes. But it's the utilization of community colleges they're not being taken to their full potential. There's some do very well. And I think if the state is going to benefit from the skilled workforce, then the state ought to pay for it with a statewide tax.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hutchings.
It's interesting because I'm very opposed to taxing, but for our community colleges, I would have to agree with a yes on that.
Okay. Unanimity, it's great. I guess no one wants to add more to that? Do you have a expansion? Okay.
Taxes do have their purposes.
All
Some are
right.
good and some aren't.
All righty. Good to know. And maybe the last question of the night has to do with taxes. Considering Wyoming's high rate of tobacco use and the public cost of tobacco-related illnesses and death, would you support a tax on cigarettes at a level to discourage young people from starting to smoke? And we've been told that effective level starts at $1 or more. And so we will start with Mr. Emmerich. Would you support such a tobacco tax?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I would. But we have to titrate where that level is, because it will force people to buy untaxed in the reservation, or if it gets too high, they'll go to Colorado or South Dakota, things of that sort. I think the disincentive of the price is important, but we have to set that level or a place that it doesn't force illegal importation.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Hutchings.
I've actually had this conversation with someone just recently, and my answer was no. I'm not for a tax on cigarettes. I've seen people pay $10 a package for cigarettes, and it's not a deterrent at all, the high price as I see it. And then if we are to tax someone on the cigarettes, will the tax go to, as this particular person mentioned, will it go to helping with their health care? Or will it go into a pot in the state that will spend somewhere else? So no, I'm against the state tax on cigarettes.
All right. Mr. Wright?
Yes, I am for a tax against cigarettes. One, to discourage it. It does help, especially with the younger people that perhaps don't have enough money to put even gas in their tank. But if it's a little bit harder to buy cigarettes, it might dissuade them. Also, there are increased health costs from the fact that people do smoke, and sometimes we have to pick up the bill, and they don't have insurance, or they're sent to the ER, and we have to end up fitting it. So there are the factors that it's going to cost us one way or the other.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone want to expand or comment further? Okay. Yes, you're ready? You want to say something or no?
No.
Okay, all right, very, very good.
I'll let it go.
Okay, excellent. And just a comment. We've been getting some questions that are sort of a political, partisan nature, and I'm going to put those aside for now because I think, we're running out of time for one. But I encourage if anyone has follow-up questions with any of these candidates, get in touch with them, and I'm sure they seem open to having conversations. And we're getting toward the end of the night. I guess just real briefly, I'm just going to ask that question I've been asking about, would you be willing to support the legislature making itself comply with the open meetings laws that all the local governments have to, which is that you can close a meeting, but for a very set number of circumstances, not just because it would be more comfortable to do things behind closed doors. And I know that's a loaded question, but as a League of Women Voters open government person, just interested to hear, and because the legislature does enjoy that privilege of not having to comply with the open meetings laws. And so just real briefly, if we could just run down the list there. And Ms. Hutchings, do you want to weigh in on that?
Absolutely yes from me.
Okay. Mr. Wright?
Absolutely, yes. I encourage transparency in government.
All the way.
And the fact that executive sessions, I believe they should be recorded. I believe that we can always protect those with the fact that you might need a court order. We do very similar things with personnel records in criminal cases, and potentially exculpatory material that needs to be released. So there's nothing to say that we can't do something very similar for these. And it's a good thing, and it may improve our standing and transparency in government since we're so low right now.
The only way to go is up, I guess.
We're at rock bottom.
Okay. Mr. Emmerich, where do you stand on that?
I think we're all probably having a love fest here, yes, because I agree. We're trying to do it in the legislature by streaming committee meetings. Mm-hmm. We're running into budget situations of trying to get enough people and enough equipment to stream all of this. I think there are probably, the only time that I would suggest executive sections is probably in caucuses and those things that involve personnel.
Okay, very good. And we're coming up to the time where you have 2 minutes to close, and I'm going to ask our timer to add 15 or 20 seconds to the front end of that, so you can address the principles that the League of Women Voters has written on campaign integrity, and if you support them, if you support all of them, if you have objections to any of them, if you've found it necessary in the past to maybe not comply with these, but I'm just going to read them real briefly for the benefit of the audience. And again, we have hard copies out there in the hallway. Candidates will defend the right of every qualified Wyoming voter to full and equal participation in the electoral process. Candidates will conduct honest and open campaigns, stating the sources of facts used in their campaigns. Candidates will stick to the campaign issues in statements, debates, advertisements, and news releases. They will not permit use of character defamation or other attacks on opponents' personal or family lives. Candidates will disavow assertions that misrepresent, distort, or otherwise falsify the facts. And number 5, candidates will publicly reject actions by supporters that violate these principles. So at the beginning of your 2-minute closing, if you can just briefly address these, where you stand on them. And let's see, Mr. Wright, it looks like it's your turn to start on this. So your 2 minutes plus grace time starts now.
Thank you. Yes, I support all these issues. I think these are important for not just this race, but any race, especially in a democracy when you want to actually talk about the facts and the figures and the issues and not just attack people. I don't see the issue of this being as prevalent in a lot of these local races, just because we know each other and we're going to see each other regardless, whatever the outcome is of this campaign. We're going to bump into each other from now on. But it's very important to encourage these on statewide races and also on a national level. I think that we definitely have gotten away from that on a national level, and it's almost become a toxic political environment. I wish that they all agreed with these on the national ones.
And you want to just go ahead and segue into your 2-minute closing, or do you, and maybe we'll just, do this quick round robin and then come back and we'll do a wrap up at that point. So I guess, Mr. Emmerich, circling around to you, your position on the principles.
You're taking all the fun out of...
Well, I understand it. It makes things a little calmer, but...
I agree with them completely. I think they're totally valid, and
okay.
we're going to adhere to them. I think we will.
And now you and Ms. Hutchings, having served and had legislative races previously, has your campaign, have you been able to observe and comply with these in your own campaigns?
In my mind, yes. I really have
Okay.
been able to do it. We've tried to make I've tried to make it a